You didn't break into anyone's home. You didn't threaten anyone. You didn't do anything you thought was illegal. But under a rule the ATF quietly pushed through, you could be a felon right now and not even know it. That's not a headline designed to scare you. That's what's actually happening. The ATF has finalized a new regulatory rule that redefines how certain firearms and firearm components are classified. And the problem isn't just what the rule says. The problem is what it doesn't say clearly, and how ordinary gun owners who followed every law they knew about are now sitting in legal grey zones that carry federal felony charges. Today, I'm going to break this down the right way. Not panic, not politics, just the law, what it means for you and what you need to do right now. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll understand exactly where you stand, and more importantly, what to do about it. I've spent years working in and around firearms law. I've seen what happens when the government shifts the definition of something mid-game. I've seen good people, responsible gun owners, hunters, collectors, veterans face federal charges because they didn't know a rule changed. That's not justice, and it's exactly why we're here. Here's what most people don't realize about the ATF's rulemaking process. Congress passes laws. That part everyone knows. But federal agencies like the ATF also have the power to write their own rules that carry the force of law. Those rules can expand, narrow, or reinterpret what the statute actually says, often in ways Congress never intended and the public never voted on. And when those rules change the definition of a regulated item, something that was perfectly legal to own last year can become illegal to possess today. Not illegal to buy going forward, illegal to already have. That's where we are right now. The ATF's new rule touches on how certain items are classified under the National Firearms Act and the Gun Control Act. And the critical thing to understand is this. Federal firearms law doesn't care about your intent. It doesn't care that you bought something legally. It doesn't care that you had no idea the classification changed. If you possess a newly regulated item without going through the proper federal process, the law treats that as a federal felony. That's up to 10 years in federal prison. Not a fine, not a misdemeanor, a felony. So yes, this matters. Let's walk through exactly what happened. The ATF published a final rule that expands or modifies how specific firearm components and configurations are regulated. Depending on which rule we're specifically looking at, this may involve pistol braces, solvent trap kits, forced reset triggers, or other accessories that millions of Americans bought legally, used legally, and stored legally in their homes. Here's the catch that most of the coverage gets wrong. People hear new rule and they think, okay, so I just can't buy one now. That's not how this works. The ATF's position is that these items, or items configured in a certain way, are now regulated under existing federal law, meaning the regulatory change doesn't just affect future purchases, it reaches back to what you already own. Think about that for a second. You went to a gun store. You bought something that was sitting on the shelf legally, sold legally, manufactured legally. You took it home, you used it on the range, and now the federal government says that item, as you have it, may be an unregistered NFA item. An unregistered NFA item. That is a federal felony by default. Now, here's what most people misunderstand at this point. They hear that and they think, well, the ATF must have some kind of amnesty or registration period. Sometimes they do, and that matters enormously. The details of whether a registration window exists, whether it's still open, and whether your specific item qualifies, those details could be the difference between a legal path forward and criminal exposure. That's not a hypothetical. That's the structure of how this plays out in real enforcement. So the first thing you need to do right now is identify whether any of your current firearms or accessories fall within the scope of this rule. Don't guess. Don't assume it doesn't apply to you because you've never had a problem before. Look it up. Read the rule directly. Or better yet, talk to a licensed firearms attorney who knows federal law. Here's where I want to stop and reframe something, because I think a lot of people are processing this the wrong way. The instinct when you hear news like this is to get angry at the politics of it. And look, there are serious Second Amendment arguments about whether the ATF has the legal authority to do what it's doing here. Courts have pushed back on ATF rules before. There is active litigation on multiple fronts. Those arguments matter. But here's the problem with focusing only on the political fight right now. While courts work through those challenges, the rule is in effect. And the DOJ prosecutes people under rules that are in effect. The fact that a rule might eventually be overturned does not protect you from being indicted under it while it's still law. That's not how the system works. So what I'm telling you is not to give up on the legal and political fight. I'm telling you that the fight in court takes time, and your legal exposure is right now. These are two separate problems, and they require two separate responses. Let me tell you something about how federal firearms enforcement actually operates, because this is the part people don't want to hear. The ATF doesn't need to make you its primary target to destroy your life. Federal investigations of larger networks, dealers, manufacturers, range owners, online communities, they generate leads. Names come up, records get pulled. And if your name is associated with a purchase that is now considered a regulated item without the proper paperwork, you become a thread worth pulling. You don't have to have done anything malicious, you just have to be in the wrong database at the wrong time. Federal prosecution also has a high conviction rate. The resources available to federal prosecutors are not comparable to a local case. Once you're under federal indictment on a firearms charge, even a charge that gets reduced or dismissed eventually, you're looking at legal fees that can hit six figures. Lost employment, strained relationships, and years of your life consumed by the process. So when I say take this seriously, I mean take the process seriously, not just the outcome. Here's what you actually need to do. First, inventory what you have. Pull out every firearm, every component, every accessory you own. This is not about paranoia. This is about knowing where you stand. Second, read the specific rule. The ATF publishes its final rules in the Federal Register. You can access these online. The rule will describe what's regulated, under what classification, and whether there are any compliance options or grace periods. Read it yourself, even if it's dense. You need to understand the scope. Third, if any of your items fall within the rule's scope, do not make any moves without legal advice. Do not sell the item without knowing whether that creates additional liability. Do not destroy it without knowing the proper procedure. Do not assume that getting rid of it quietly protects you. In some cases it won't, and in some cases it could make things worse. Fourth, talk to a firearms attorney. Not a general practice attorney who handles the occasional gun case. A lawyer who specifically focuses on federal firearms law. There are attorneys across the country who do this work. Find one. Fifth, stay current on the litigation. There are Second Amendment organizations actively challenging rules like this in federal court. Some of those challenges have succeeded. Injunctions have been granted that temporarily blocked enforcement of ATF rules. That landscape changes. Follow it. Let me pull this together quickly before we close. The ATF has finalized a rule that reclassifies certain items many gun owners already legally possess. That reclassification carries federal felony exposure for people who don't comply. Whether there's a registration or amnesty window depends on the specific rule, and that detail matters enormously. The political and legal fight against the rule is real and ongoing, but it doesn't protect you from prosecution while the rule is active. The practical steps are: know what you own, read the rule, get legal advice if you're in scope, and track the litigation. That's the situation. Here's the bottom line. The ATF's regulatory power has grown significantly over the past several decades. And one of the most dangerous patterns we see is rules that change definitions retroactively, making previously legal conduct criminal without any clear public warning system. That's a serious problem for a country built on fair notice and due process. And it's the reason you cannot assume that following the law as you understood it when you bought something means you're still in compliance today. I'm not saying the law is fair here. I'm saying the law is what it is until the courts change it. And in the meantime, your job is to stay out of the crosshairs. Know your inventory. Understand the rule. Get counsel if you need it. This channel exists because the law doesn't always come with a warning label. Gun owners in this country are routinely caught off guard by regulatory changes that happen without headlines, without press conferences, and without anyone checking whether you knew. My job is to make sure you know. If this breakdown was useful to you, subscribe now. We cover firearms law, self-defense law, and Second Amendment issues regularly in plain language so you're not left guessing. And I'll leave you with this. The most dangerous assumption a gun owner can make is that because they've never had a problem, they never will. The law doesn't grade on past behavior. It grades on current compliance. Know where you stand.